great interest in the mechanics of the past stems from when I was like our Jack, when I was quite a small boy, going along the canal from Bolton to Bury and seeing the remains of all the old coal mines and cotton mill engine houses, and some of them were actually still working, so it made it even more interesting. That's really why I've created all this lot here in my backyard, and it's sort of a vain attempt to hang on to childhood memories, I suppose.
Fred's garden was unique. It was all assembled from scrap and the cast-offs from old mills and factories. But it was probably the finest working example of a steam-powered engineering workshop in the country. But more than anything, it was Fred's playground, a place where he breathed life back into rusty old machinery and steam engines. And when he went to Buckingham Palace to receive his MBE, he got no doubts about why it had been awarded to him.
I can hardly write, but I can do things, I'm a mechanic. I'm a Backstreet Mecnanic. Aberdeen University gave me an honorary degree in Backstreet Mechanicing. And now Birmingham University have given me a degree in Backstreet Mechanicing. So it'll do for me, that,
And now you've been honoured by the Queen.
Oh, yeah, we're an MBE as well, yeah.
All engineers are Backstreet mechanics to a greater or lesser extent. Basically, we all like tinkering about. We're a practical profession. I don't think it's anything to be ashamed of to be a Backstreet mechanic. In fact, I think it's something to celebrate. I think he's a very good mechanic. And an excellent engineer.
You go to so many museums that appear to be dead. Nothing happens, lots of them try their best and actually do manufacture bits of things. But this lot here, it all works full bore, You can drill a 2.5-inch hole through an iron bar, or you can forge a big lump of iron 2 inches square, or saw a piece of stone in half a foot thick. So I don't think I've done so bad, really, out of the junk that would all have gone into the scrapyards, but for me.
And Fred's machines, of course, he didn't pay a lot for them, if anything, because they were always archaic, not wanted, belt-driven, but it were ideal. It suited his steam engine, which, as you've seen it down in his yard, it drove to every corner of the yard.
Nearly every nut and bolt in all of this place, I know where it come from. Every piece of shafting, and every wheel, and every boiler, and, every spanner nearly. And it sort of grows, because once you've got established, people ring up and say, you want a bucket full of big spanners that are quite obsolete and nobody wants anymore.
Yeah, he had drilling machines, and he built a machine for cutting with a diamond wheel for cutting stone. That were round the back of one of his sheds. Oh, he could do anything, as we know. He was wonderful. With metal, or stone, or wood. Incredible.
Gravestone quality.
One of his favourite pastimes was to journey down to a local scrapyard, and he'd be a devil, actually. He'd be rooting round through all kinds of boxes and skips and God knows what else, searching out little bits of brass and copper, little bits of offcuts. And the people who I went with him once or twice, and the people who owned the scrapyard obviously thought a lot of Fred, because they never charged them, and if they did, it with coppers for these odds and sods and bits of leftovers.
You don't want paying, do you?
Do you ever pay
For a fee?
I think the garden was Fred, in essence, who he was. More than the engines, actually, because those things in the garden have been gleaned over many years. And just basically bits of scrap, and then they came into Fred's capable hands, and he breathed life into them again and turned them into something special, which meant a lot to him, of course, with his skills.
I find them hiding in damp, wet corners of disused spinning mills.
And every time we were away from home, I know that Fred was very anxious to get back, because he always had another project on the go. So they meant the world to him, really, and it was like having a new baby in a way. If anybody had come down to the garden and say to Fred, "Oh, we've got a milling machine or a radial arm drill and it's going to get smashed up, can you rescue it?" And Fred had come indoors and moan to me and say something like, "Well, I've no room for it, but I'm not having it smashed up." So we'd have all these things outside that would accumulate. And certainly before my time, of course, he'd been building up the garden collection for many, many years, hadn't he? Yeah, that's Fred in essence, that garden, who he was.
I think the biggest influence is his love of steam. And his interest in how it can be used to power large-scale machines. I think that's what influenced everything that he did. It would be very easy for him to have powered his workshop with electricity, but he chose to build a great big enormous boiler, great big enormous flywheels, and drive his machines from that. It probably took him something like 3 hours to fire up his workshop, which he could have done with the flick of a switch. So I think steam was the big driver in his life.
I recognised almost straight away there was something unusual about this chap. I had examined many restored old boilers and engines and bits and pieces like that, and when I came to meet Fred, I realised that he was an extremely thorough person. The preparation of the boiler was beautiful, and the repairs he'd carried out were excellent, so I was quite impressed with him straight away. I thought it was quite amazing that from an ordinary garden he'd be able to build this workshop. I was most impressed with all the machine tools he'd assembled there and the structure to drive them, which was made out of telegraph poles. It would bring about many problems with shaft alignment and so on such a kind of a scanty structure, but he made a rigid job of it and it worked perfectly.
I'm very fortunate having all this antique, obsolete machinery that still works very well, you know. I could make most of the parts. I mean, this thing behind me, even though I don't look it, it's almost new, you know. There's only part of the boiler original, the new rims on the wheels and new solid tyres. The cylinder block, which of course is in the other shed, is almost brand new. All new sides and new end covers and new piston rods and new valve rods.
It was quite difficult at times. Fred had come in and he always had some project going, and machinery would be going in the background all day, and we always had a problem with that, or rather I had a problem with that, because I'd be stuck in the office trying to work and make telephone calls, and Fred was just like a small boy outside really playing with his machines. When I first came here, Fred would maybe have 2 or 3 helpers each day, but later on, as time progressed and more work was done on the engine, he amassed a kind of band of helpers who were only too willing to come down every day, to which I referred to as Dad's Army. They were all men of a certain age with flat caps like Fred, and they were of great use. They turned out to be really good friends of Fred's, but difficult really from a wife's point of view, because you're always the odd one out. You're the one that's complaining if there's making too much noise. Like a mother figure in a way, like small boys outside wanted to play with the toys, and they just wanted to carry on regardless.
Fred would approach a project which possibly he'd never had any experience of before and just throw himself into it in a sense. He might be making a part for one of the traction engines, and really he didn't have the special engineering skills. He would dig out an old book and read in general how you went about the job and then make a start, and if he made a mess of it he'd just start again and he just wouldn't give up.
This is like going to be more difficult than you think.
Some of the items he made for his traction engine took absolutely ages, and went through various stages of attempts and disastrous attempts, but got there eventually. I remember I did speak to an engineer once who saw some of the work that Fred had carried out on his latest traction engine, on the boiler, and this man couldn't believe that Fred had actually fashioned this particular part of the boiler by hand.
Pretty level, isn't it?
He just wouldn't believe us,
really?
and Fred told him how he'd achieved the job. And I think he was still sceptical at the end. Yet we knew that Fred had actually fashioned this part by hand over a long period. So he was admired as regards the way he would tackle any job and would never think, I've not done it before, so I can't do it.
Go and have a try, because if we overbend it, it'll, you know, it takes a bit of straightening out, yeah.
A backstreet mechanic, yeah. I mean, there's good backstreet mechanics and there's bad backstreet mechanics. I think it's fair, if he called himself that, he was probably playing himself down because Fred could turn his hands and do it. There's a lot of people that'll talk about it but can't do it. And there's them that don't talk about it but can do it.
And Fred didn't just do it on his own engines.
Really, the only steam engines that you can find today, you know, the ones that have been restored and are running, like in places like this. This is Glencleven, near Carnarvon in North Wales, and it's one of the first attempts at renovating a steam engine I had, really, and I'm quite pleased with the result. Like, really, it's rather strange how I got the job, you know. I first of all, I got an inquiry from Mr. Wakeford, who was the architect here on the site. And he said, we've got a chimney in North Wales, you know. I said, where's that? You know, he said, Carnarvon. And I said, how big is it? Thinking it would be something that we could make some money out of. And he said, it's about 60 feet high. And I said, well, it's not really big enough to travel all the way from Bolton to Carnarvon for a chimney 60 feet high. And then he said, but we've got a steam engine as well, you know, which put a different light on the matter. And when I came, like, you couldn't see the chimney for ivy. It was rather reminiscent of a Cornish tin mine job, you know, with all the ivy around. And the man in charge, he said, well, give us a price for taking the ivy off, and a price for looking at it, and a price for doing it up. And cut a long story short, we did all of that, and we got the job of renovating the chimney. And then one day it came on raining, and I sent my man for the key for the engine house. And we got in the engine house and looked at it and sort of sorry state. And it had been vandalised and all the brass bits had gone, or I thought they'd gone actually. What must have happened is the vandal must have got disturbed and left it all behind and run, and then somebody else had collected it all up and put it in a box. And I found that next door. But once I'd secured the contract, I took it all back home to Bolton. We took a shaving off here, and I shined the crank up here. Don't really know how I did that now, because the state it were in, like corrugated iron.
He was very proud of his skills, the machines that he could run, the parts that he could make, building his steam engines. He made all the parts himself. These are skills that are somewhat undervalued in our society today, and Fred tried to bring them to the fore.
I'm making square washers.
He believed that engineering was not about the theory, but about the practical application.
There's nothing wrong with that for a hole in a piece of iron, is there?
He was an absolutely superb man, whether we were working on a lathe, whether we were drilling holes through a pin, through a bolt, whether we tightened bolts up. All the bolts had to go in the right order. Everything had to be painted, but prior to that, they'd be greased, there'd be a nut tightened down, so all the flats on the nut were all equal at the front.
Considering they was mainly self-taught and there wasn't really a workshop machine that Fred couldn't operate, it's unbelievable the skills he had, really. And I know that from people who taught at technical colleges or other engineers who came on site and saw evidence of Fred's work. They were always enthusiastic and full of praise for the level of skill that he showed and the finish that he achieved with items that he'd made. From the pit egg gear, 30-foot high, right down to making his own sort of individual nuts and bolts for the traction engine.
Nearly everything big, like crank throws and all of that, were all either done on a planing machine, which worked very similar to this, or a shaper like this. Like, basically, it's a plane, it's just the tool takes a shaving off the top of, say, a forging that would have come from underneath the steam hammer, would have ended up bolted down to this bed, and the tool ridden across it with a lot of force, shavings flying everywhere. I mean, this is only a toy, really.
But in terms of the appreciation of making things out of metal and making things work, he was very good at that. but there are some special skills involved in getting old machines going and putting together the remainder of old machines to try and make them go again. And that was something that he developed a whole range of skills.
Traction engines and locomotives in the Victorian times were nearly always built in sheds like this, but, you know, actually a bit bigger, you know, maybe 8 or 9 times as long, but the machinery, you know, were all very similar to this. And they didn't seem, you know, nothing were impossible. Like nowadays, a man wouldn't be allowed to play about with something like this, he might hurt himself. But they had nothing, you know, very, very inventive time. Where they lifted things up and got things about, and everything they made were much over-engineered and always very big and very heavy. Even as late as 1880s, you know, they still had this type of gear in it. They had big overhead cranes, but if you study the old photographs carefully, you'll see there's lots of chain blocks and little arms sticking out of walls with a feeble little set of chain blocks on to mess about with weights like this.
Well, he was a self-taught mechanical engineer, and I think therefore he connected with a lot of people who've ever tinkered with a car or a motorbike. He also, I think, connected with that interest in craftsmanship and skills. And we find that increasing numbers of people also want to connect with craftsmanship and skills. And I think he was very good at bringing across the enthusiasm and interest for making things work, solving practical problems. And I think that was very much his legacy.
This is a Marshall.
Yeah, it's got the usual Marshall ailment on it. On them radiuses there. I wonder why. Marshalls always crack there.
Burrells do and all on throat plate, don't they? Fowlers are perfect.
Yeah,
never cracked nothing a Fowler.
No, very good.
Burrell have you seen cracked on the throat plate?
When you think about Fowlers, Leeds, there were more traction engine builders and loco builders in Leeds than any other bloody city in the land, you know, I mean, there's dozens of them, weren't there, you know? Right, early days, before any of our men, you know, like lots of loco builders, you know, built a few for them men up northeast, you know.
All that employment, weren't they?
Yeah. Now there's no left at all, is there, you know?
Nothing.
What do we do now? Shopkeepers.
In his programmes, either Fred knew these people because he was involved with the people. He'd found out people who could flange a plate or rivet something that perhaps Fred couldn't do. And along the way, these companies that were probably once huge, great big companies employing thousands of people have dwindled down to just 1 and 2 now because this sort of work isn't widely used. Everything's gone smaller and to silicon chips and printed circuits and things instead of rivets and nuts and bolts. But Fred found these people and yeah, Fred found them interesting, and then the TV found them interesting because people just don't realise that it is all still happening around you.
Yeah, this is the differential wheel off the back end of my tractor, and of course this ring gear here is a brand new one, and all I'm doing is just drilling the bolt holes to bolt it on the centre.
He could communicate. You know, anybody could understand him, and he could put it over in a way so that everybody, he didn't sort of talk down to anybody. He didn't explain things in too much detail, but he could put things across so that everybody could understand them.
All the machinery, you know, in 1870s and 1880s, 90s, it'd all be very, very similar to this, apart from the gearing would have been exposed maybe. And of course they all relied on cow's bellies, you know, leather belts. You know, all locomotives and traction engines have all been made by belt-driven machinery. I mean, no fancy CNC tackle, you know. Quite dangerous as well, you know. I should imagine they had the first year of disasters. Now everything's got guards on and you've got to wear goggles and all that like. I think really we're breeding a nation of men who, you know, aren't what they used to be. That's my interpretation of it. You know, they have got health studios keep in good order, like. And as you see, this is fully automatic. It's doing a grand job. There's only one difference between this and the most modern state-of-the-art thing that we've got now, is the modern one goes a bit faster. The latest bit is the gearing that I've just done. I made the blanks, but I didn't put the teeth on. I've not got a gear cutting machine.
Nearly all the work on his engines was done in this workshop, but there were a few jobs that were too big to be done here. So for these, he went to a local engineering company.
Yeah. Yeah, when I think that when I got it, you know, all them years ago, the teeth were all like that on every wheel, you know, sort of thing. You can tell how many thousands of miles it must have done. Yeah.
They're really sharp, aren't they?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. They must have lost 3/8 of an inch off each side that's worn away.
Many people just didn't know that. They didn't know that there were forges still operating. They didn't know that rivets were being made, or imperial nuts and bolts, or just all manner of bits and pieces. The fact that there are traditional boilermakers still operating in the country, where steam engines can be repaired to the traditional manner. Fred just showed people what was in that shed on the industrial estate that was making all that noise and racket. And he showed people how we came to be where we are. He showed that engineering was something not to be hidden away and something to be proud of.
I think Fred's a really good role model. One of my personal things about engineering is that we don't market it in the way that we should. We don't market it as a fun profession.
Stay there.
We market it to youngsters as being worthy, an earnest profession, worthwhile. Now, if you're a young rebel of 15, then I don't think you're that interested in worthy and earnest. You're interested in fun and reward. And so I think Fred is always seen as quite a role model because of his natural enthusiasm and the way he talks about engineering things and the toys that he owns.
I think mechanic's not the correct word. He was probably a backstreet engineer, and by that he meant he'd possibly no formal training in engineering, but it was something which he'd picked up and read. And he was very accomplished in a lot of things that he did. He tried no end of things, and on the programmes, if he was offered the chance of having a go, Fred would always have a go. He was, interested in having a play.
He was a lot of a perfectionist, I tell you. You'd put a rivet in, and if it weren't quite right, it was drill it and get it out, and it takes some drilling and getting out, I could tell you. You know, if you did something wrong, he wouldn't start shouting and bawling about it. He'd just say, no, that'll not do. And you had to do it again. You know, so you quickly learn only to do it once and do it right.
Getting better.
Oh, yeah, many a time I've seen him, we've put a rivet in. Oh, that's gone a bit wonky, that, he'd say. No, we'll do the next one, we'll come back to that, you know, and we'd put another one in, oh, that's better. You know, and we'd do 3 or 4 more, perhaps, and then he'd come, look at that one, look at it, come around here and look at it from here. Look, it's down a bit, you know, drill it out, he'd say, you know, let's drill it out, you know, and out it would have to come, and we'd put another one in. And that was just because, you know, when you're manipulating your air-operated hammer, if it had gone a little bit one-sided. He'd done it himself, but he wasn't satisfied with it, so out it had to come. Now, nobody else would have done that.
My favourite thing, Fred's contribution to the sort of knowledge of things, was watching him demonstrating in his own workshop at home how you riveted, how you created arches, those sort of things, the practical elements of the Industrial Revolution. To see things come alive that you've only read about. I remember one example was when he was caulking on a boiler years and years ago, but for me, always wondering what this sort of mystical process was. It was great to see somebody doing it in action, and that he was doing it in his back garden, probably something that, with the envy of many, you know, grown-up boys, was something quite special.
There was nothing in between the plates, maybe a coat of red lead or something like that, but just the rivets alone, you know, wouldn't make it waterproof, so all the edges of the seams had all got to be caught with a contraption like this. You know, in shipyards, they all must have been quite deaf and mad with the noise. You can imagine, you know, 500 or 600 blokes in all of a ship all with one of these. We must have been like bedlam and all. But any rivets that weren't quite finished off, you could go around the edges with a caulking hammer and swell the metal up so that, you know, the water didn't come in.
Fred used to compare his work with what he'd seen on something old and interesting. And he had an ability to say to himself, that's not good enough, I can do better than that, and I'm going to do it again. And that is in fact what he did. The boiler on this roll was actually the third boiler. He actually had 2 attempts at making it, which he was not happy with, and the boiler barrel is the third one. So he knew himself he could do better.
And he would ask me things about riveting and about caulking and the peculiarities of flanging, for example. And this were much used later on by Fred when he did his steam tractor in recent years.
Now then, Fred, right, gum, that's a lovely surprise.
How are you doing?
Just let me welcome you with this job. That's from Ralph from Aberdeen. Paul, can you just turn your machine off, mate? Have you ever met my old mate, Fred? This is Paul.
I've never met Paul before.
He's our boiler fitter.
Yeah.
He's 50 years of age,
Apprentice,
and he's our
yeah.
apprentice.
Very
He's
good.
the oldest apprentice in Great Britain. He's a good lad. Even though
Are you
he's
enjoying
frustrated.
it? Your new apprenticeship?
Oh, aye.
Yeah.
Learning all sorts.
Yeah, well, it's very interesting, isn't it, mending things like this. You know, there's not many people get a chance to do it. Not a lot left of this one, is there?
It's not as bad as some have had, but a
no.
lot of grooving down here,
Yeah.
and we've already started building it up with wells.
Yeah.
Back down here and all.
Yeah,
they were, weren't they?
Yeah. He were an observer, so if he had that particular interest, he'd look about him. From a railway bridge through to a riveted structure through to a Lancashire boiler, and with reading about it and studying it for himself, then he had a hands-on approach of experimenting with putting rivets in himself in his yard. He eventually, over the years, developed his own method of carrying out boiler work to absolute superb, 100%. But there's nothing wrong whatsoever with the craftsmanship that Fred had put into his boiler making expertise.
You're going to show me your new boiler in the your new Arga.
Oh,
in
we've
the
got to
kitchen.
see that. We're going to go and have a brew in there, without a doubt. Yeah. You'll like this, Fred.
Yeah.
1882 Lancashire boiler. Yeah.
See you later then.
Yeah, all right, see you later. Don't look too hard.
Yeah, see, you've done it then. Magic. Yeah. Good replacement for the Arga, that, I think, isn't it?
Well, it's the biggest and most unique kitchen range in Great Britain, undoubtedly. So I'm informed, anyway. Yeah. We took it out of a mill down in Fazeley in Staffordshire. But I was very pleased to get this because it's a very made Lancashire made, 1882. And it's William Bland, and you know.
I've never heard of them.
No, neither had I.
Only 5 mile down the road,
Yeah.
I mean, I've kept abreast of your activities on it, and you know, lots of people have these wonderful ideas, but they never come to now, do they? But this has, hasn't it?
Oh yeah,
I mean,
it's
it's complete with repairs and everything, which quite wonderful, eh?
Yeah.
Was the bread good when you've done it?
It's good bread. Talking about bread, you want a piece of old bread?
Ah, thank you. Right,
Yeah, watch it up, gum your teeth.
More than likely will. Yeah, it looks splendid, doesn't it?
A pot of tea there for you all, Fred. All right, now.
Yeah. We put plenty of sugar in.
There's plenty of sugar in. Some would say you're sweet enough, though, you know.